Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. June is Forage Month, and to celebrate, we are hosting webinars every Tuesday and Thursday through the month of June, starting at 10 a.m. Central Time. Today, we're going to be talking about forage insect pests. My name is Kelly Palmer, and I'm a regional extension agent on the livestock and forage team, and I'm based in Bay Minette, Alabama, and cover Southwest Alabama. Today we're going to cover three of the main forage pests that we get calls about from producers in Alabama, and those are fall armyworm, Bermuda grass stem maggot, and fire ants. And there are a lot of different insect pests that affect Alabama forages, but we're going to cover those three today. Before I really get into the meat of the presentation, it's really important to get proper identification of whatever the insect pest is. And this is true as far as insects or weeds or really anything. You need to know proper identification so that you can actually get into some of those control options. And there's a funny story that goes along with this picture. So one day, my friend Jennifer calls and she said, "Oh my gosh, I have a spider in my house and you need to tell me if it's a bad spider or if it's a good spider." And I told her, "Okay, well just try and take a real good picture for me and send it to me and we can see what kind of spider it is." And she said, "Well, I can't do that. I already smished it." And so after a while of talking to her, she actually said, "Well, hang on, let me just send this to you real quick." And she actually sent me this picture of the drawing, and I thought that her 5-year-old had drawn it, but really she did. And this just shows you it's really important to get a good picture. I mean, drawing it for us isn't really going to be helpful. Making sure you get an up-close image that's not blurry, actually shows them identifying characteristics of the insect is really helpful when you send it to us. So making sure you get quality images will really help us give you a proper identification. If you're not sure and you can't get a picture and you may want to collect a sample, there's a couple ways to do that. So the first option is if you have a medicine vial or anything like that in your house, you can simply get that, put a few of the insects in it, add some alcohol to the container, and you can mail it to us. The other option is that you can simply put the insects in a Ziploc bag and close the bag, and you can put it in the freezer for about an hour, let those insects die. Then you can send us a fresh frozen sample or bring the frozen sample into your local extension office. Either way, if you collect a sample for us, it's really important for you to actually put in some info when you send it in. So that should be your name, some contact information in case we have other questions related to the identification of the insect. It should also include the date that you collected it and the location where you collected the sample, because location is really important with a lot of these insect pests. Also to note is to try and write all that information in pencil, because a lot of times if something gets wet and it's written in ink, the ink will run, and then by the time we get it, we won't be able to see what it actually says. So making sure you send in some contact info is really important. So the first pest we're going to cover today is fall armyworm. And like I said before, identification is really important. So for fall armyworm, you're going to look at, they have these characteristic 4 dots on the 8th abdominal segment. And really, if you just look towards the end of the insect, and if you see those 4 symmetric black dots, that's very identifiable for fall armyworm. They also have a broad pale band along the top line of the body, which is one of the identifying characteristics. And they also have, if you zoom in on the head capsule, and you'll be able to see this in the field, but they have a very net-like pattern where their eyes are, and they have kind of an upside-down wishbone on their face. And those are the kind of the characteristics that you look for fall armyworm. Another thing to really remember, and this is not just for fall armyworm, but really for any insect pest within your forage crop, is to monitor. So a sweep net will save you so much money over the long run. So it's really important to invest in a sweep net if you haven't already. You can order those from places like Gimpler's or BioQuip and places like that. They're about $20. But a sweep net will save you a fortune down the road in spray costs and chemical costs. So what you're looking for when you're going out to sweep is, this is a really good example. So you want to try and get into that forage canopy and knock loose any of those insects by sweeping back and forth throughout that forage canopy. And all the insects will end up in the bottom part of this net, and you'll be able to collect a sample or look. When you're looking for fall armyworm, what you're looking for are about that size. So when you get to this size armyworm, it's almost too late to be able to spray anything and be economical. So you're really looking for armyworms when they're this small. And this is where the sweep net is really, really important, because if you imagine trying to go out and scout a field for armyworms, you're not going to notice armyworms when they're that size in a pasture or hay field. You're going to notice them when they're this size, and then it's too late. So what that sweep net allows you to do is pick up these insects when they're real small, and it's still going to be very economical to treat the populations that are out there. And another thing to note when you're sweep netting for armyworms is they tend to migrate from the peripheral areas of the field in. And so when you're starting to monitor, try and start, June. This is really great timing for this webinar, because June is the perfect time to start sweep netting and monitoring for armyworms in your field. So start on those edges, pick a few edge spots and sweep once a week starting in June. And they're going to be present in your fields potentially through the end of fall. So sweeping every week is really, really important, so you can pick up on armyworms when they're this size and still treatable in an economic way. So the first question I usually get when people have fall armyworm is, hey, these armyworms appeared overnight and they've eaten all my grass. So that's where the monitoring is really important. So small armyworms, you don't really notice them in your fields very much. And for that first 10 days of that life cycle, they're pretty small and they're not really eating very much. That last 4 days of the larval life cycle of the caterpillars is really where they do almost all the damage. And so what you want to do is be sweep netting every week and catch them sometime in that first 10 days. So that's why the week is very important. So trying to sweep net every 7 to 10 days so that you can catch these armyworms when they're small and not eating as much, and you'll still be able to spray something to protect your forage crop. So this just shows, and I know I've said sweep net a lot already, but this just kind of shows you the percent of acres damaged by fall armyworm, and this is in spite of control. So these people have still done some type of control, as in putting in an insecticide spray. Those that used a sweep net had less than 25% of their acres damaged, but those that were using some other method of just trying to walk through their field and notice armyworms or something like that had well over 75% of their acres damaged by fall armyworm, and that's in spite of spraying. So both options sprayed, but using a sweep net, that's a far less amount of damaged acres using that sweep net versus using any other type of monitoring method. So say you've been monitoring your fields and you know that you have fall armyworm. So now what do? If it's close to harvest time, go ahead and harvest. So the ones out there, a lot of times if it's really hot and dry, which it really favors fall armyworm in hot, dry weather, then a lot of those will be die if you go ahead and cut. Treat larvae with an insecticide when they're small, and we saw those in the pictures before. When you're monitoring that, you want to get them when they're small, before they've caused a lot of damage. And so a good kind of economic threshold for that is 2 to 3 armyworms per square foot. You also want to choose your insecticide based on cost, residual, speed of action, harvest intervals, and environmental impacts. And so this just shows you about 2 armyworms per square foot, and it also shows dead armyworms. So if the weather is hot, when you do actually harvest, you'll kill most of the armyworms that are present out in that field already. So use a cheap, short residual product if you have armyworms that are similar in size. So that really means that you have just one generation of armyworms out there. And so using something that's shorter, you know that you can get rid of that generation and there's no other generations out there. So that should take care of your problem with that one spray. Use a long residual product if you have armyworms of different sizes. So different sizes indicates that there's an overlap of generation out there, and you have multiple generations surviving in your field at the same time. So you want something that lasts a little bit longer, so that it gives you longer residual control of those overlapping armyworm generations. You also want to use a long residual product if you have a long time until your harvest date. This will protect your crop over that time that it's growing before you harvest again. Always make sure to read the label carefully, especially about number of applications a year. A lot of these insecticides have a limit, especially the long residual products, on how many times you can actually apply to your field. So make sure you choose those accordingly. Don't just use a long residual product because you think that'll give you protection through the whole year, but then spray it repeatedly. I mean, you really need to check those labels and make sure you're staying within applications per year. You also really want to make sure that you rotate insecticides, and you want to do that by mode of action, not by name of the active ingredient, but by mode of action. And to give you some of these management options, this is an awesome publication that Kathy Flanders put together, and it was updated just last year. So if you go to the aces.edu website and search for management of fall armyworm in pastures and hayfields, that really is going to list out all of these control options that we just talked about. So if you know you need a cheap short residual product or a long residual product, all of those products are listed in this publication, and she separates them out by length and cost of control. And so that's a really, really good publication. And so make sure that if you do have armyworms, that you search for that so you know your management options. We also have what we have is the Alabama Armyworm watch list. And so if you're in Alabama, you can send me an email. So say you're monitoring your fields each week and you pick up armyworms and you're in Lauderdale County. You can send me an email and say, hey, I've been sweeping, it's June 4th, and I just realized that I have fall armyworm. Well, you send that to me, and then we have a watch list email, and I can email that out to everyone in your region so that then they know that they can start scouting their fields and that fall armyworms are actually present in your county. So you can also tell your local extension office, and they'll pass the information along to me. The next pest that we're going to cover is Bermuda grass stem maggot. Bermuda grass stem maggot is a pest of, obviously it's well named, it's a pest of Bermuda grass. It was new to Georgia in 2010 and then found throughout Alabama by 2012. And this picture really shows, kind of what characteristically Bermuda grass stem maggot damage looks like. And it almost looks like that field had just started growing and it had a little bit of a heavy frost hit it in spring. And so kind of that dead tip look is very, very characteristic of Bermuda grass stem maggot damage. If you kind of zoom in and you go closer on that field and you look, you'll see these dead terminal ends. And so what the stem maggot is doing, it's actually inside the shoot, and it's chewing off those ends to where it causes what looks like those frosted tips in that field. Then if you take those tips, they pull out really, really easily, and you can actually see the chewing damage from the maggot that's within that stem. So it's very, very characteristic of Bermuda grass stem maggot. And that's just the up close of the maggot. The maggots are very, very hard to find in the field, and that's why you really want to look at the damage in the field and look for those damaged terminals before you cut. But that's really what you're going to notice. You're not going to see the maggots. Really, you're not really going to notice the adult flies very much. So really try and check for that terminal damage of the Bermuda grass when you're out in your field. This is a picture of what the adult fly looks like. And so you can't see from this angle, but there's actually 4 symmetric black dots on the abdomen, and the abdomen's kind of a creamy yellow. And that's very characteristic of Bermuda grass stem maggot fly. And so when you're actually out and you're sweeping for fall armyworms and things like that, you will pick up these adult flies as well. So that's another option. If you wanted to collect some of the flies and bring them in, we would be able to help you with identification of the flies also. So the key to management is understanding the life cycle of the fly and how Bermuda grass grows. So the life cycle of the fly, the adult fly lives 18 to 20 days. It'll lay eggs out in the field. Then the larvae will migrate into the stems of the Bermuda grass, and the larvae are present for 7 to 10 days. And the 7 to 10 days, you'll hear this in just a minute, and that's how we come up with our spray protocol for control. So it's really important to remember that 7 to 10 days. Then those larvae will pupate and become adults again. So there is a difference between cultivars when you're looking at damaged by Bermuda grass stem maggot. So they tend to prefer the thinner bladed grasses. So those are coastal, common, Russell, and Alicia. You see more damage in those varieties versus some of the Tiftons or Stargrass and things like that. So when you get into these Tifton 68 and Tifton 85, they have a thicker bladed grass, and the flies don't tend to prefer that type of Bermuda grass over the other cultivars. So say you've been scouting and you have maggots that are present now. So we can't really stress this enough. If you have Bermuda grass stem maggots that are present in your field, you need to take action now. You don't want to wait and hope that your grass is going to recover, you can fertilize, and your grass is going to outgrow the maggots and things like that. That's just really not going to happen. So this really is a hayfield problem. So if you are just doing Bermuda grass pasture and you're rotationally grazing or continuous grazing, but if it is grazed, so typically those animals will actually eat the top part of that Bermuda grass, and so they're actually eating the maggots as well. So you don't really see this much in a pasture situation. It's mostly a hayfield problem. So make sure that if you're seeing that damage that you go ahead and take action now. So the first thing that'll happen are those top leaves of the grass will die. Then the grass tries to put out new side shoots, but the maggot will start eating those side shoots as well. So your grass, no matter what you do, is not going to grow out of the damage. It's only going to continue to get worse. So it's really, really important to remember when you're talking about Bermuda grass stem maggot and spray protocols. So say they're in your hayfield, what do you do? So if you're close to cutting, within a week or so of normal harvest time, go ahead and cut that hay and remove it to 3 to 4 inches. 7 to 10 days after you cut that hay, or a few days after regrowth has started, go ahead and apply a pyrethroid spray, and that'll kill the adults. So the entire target for these sprays are to kill adults. It's very hard to manage the larval stage of the Bermuda grass stem maggot, so all the sprays are actually targeting the adult flies. So spray 7 to 10 days after regrowth has started. And then this is the really important part. So remember, those larvae are inside those growing shoots. So those are going to become adults again. And so 7 to 10 days later, since that pyrethroid hasn't really affected those immature stages of the flies, they're going to go ahead and pupate and become adults again. And so you really need to follow 7 to 10 days later with another pyrethroid spray to target those new adults. So the 2 sprays, 7 to 10 days apart, or it's really, really important. I had a guy last year that he sprayed the first time, and then he didn't spray the second time, and the stem maggot almost wiped him out last year because he didn't follow those 2 spray protocols. So make sure you do both sprays. So if damage is occurring earlier in the season, go ahead and cut your losses. Don't wait for the grass to recover, because it won't. And don't wait and try to spray. So you need to go ahead and spray as soon as you're seeing that damage. And then go ahead and cut the hay and follow the steps listed earlier if your damage is already occurring. So all of the controls for Bermuda grass stem maggot, they're all synthetic pyrethroids. Pyrethroids, if you're in the store and you're trying to find something at the co-op or feed store, pyrethroids all end in thrin, T-H-R-I-N, and you'll notice that with the active ingredients listed here. These are the current products available to spray for Bermuda grass stem maggot. All of them are restricted use, so if you are a Bermuda grass hay producer and you don't have your private applicator license, you really need to go ahead and get that, because the last thing you want to do is wait until you see Bermuda grass stem maggot damage, you know you need to spray now, but you have to wait to get your private applicator license to be able to spray. So you really don't want to put yourself in that position. So go ahead and get that private applicator license if you don't already have one. So monitor, monitor, monitor. Make sure you check fields prior to each harvest for damaged terminals. And that's what we were seeing in that field that kind of looked frosted. Make sure you look for some of those damaged terminals throughout the field. If you see damage, go ahead and protect that next cutting by following that 7 to 10 day pyrethroid spray protocol. Often the first cutting of the year will be safe because they haven't really built up very many numbers at the beginning of the spring. but the longer you go into the season, the more likely you are to see damage. So make sure that you're monitoring those fields for stem maggot and for armyworms. I can't say monitor enough. So and these flies will also be around similar to fall armyworm. The flies will be around until late fall. So the final pests that we're going to cover today are fire ants. And most people in Alabama know what fire ants are. We're going to kind of skip over the identification of fire ants. They're very characteristic, building those large mounds out in your pastures and in your fields. So most people that I encounter actually are doing individual mound treatments of fire ants, and most of them are using a contact insecticide. What a lot of those do is they will kill a lot of workers. They kind of give you an instant gratification. So you may pour one of the mound drenches on a mound, and the next day you see a ton of dead ants all around that mound. And it gives you kind of an instant feel good that, oh, I've gotten those ants. But then maybe a few days later, you may see a new mound pop up a few feet over from where you killed that other mound. So what's happening is that you're killing a lot of the workers that you're contacting, but you're never contacting the queen directly with that insecticide. And when you're dealing with fire ants, the queen is the key to all control. So it doesn't matter how many workers you kill. If you don't kill the queen, you're not going to kill the colony. So a fire ant queen can live between 2 and 5 years, and she can lay hundreds of eggs every single day. So you can keep killing workers, but if you don't kill the queen, you're not going to kill the colony. So kill the queen, kill the colony. That's the entire goal when you're talking about fire ants. So the only management option I'm going to talk about today are fire ant baits. So we're talking about forage producers, so pastures and hay fields. So baits are really the only economical option that you have as far as controlling fire ants. So there's many advantages, and obviously there's always some disadvantages to anything. But why do you use a fire ant bait? So it's very low cost. You're talking about $16 to $23 an acre, depending on the active ingredient you choose. So it's very economical as far as large acreage areas go. You also utilize the natural behavior of the ants. So what that means is that the fire ants think that these baits are food. So they go out and the ants forage for the bait, they take it back down for you and feed it directly to the queen. So it's really, really easy. You don't have to scout out mounds and mark mounds and pour bait or treatments on them. These baits really utilize that natural behavior of the ant to do all that work for you. They're very environmentally friendly. There's a very low amount of insecticide on the actual bait. They leave no residual out in your yard. They're extremely forgiving. So unlike fertilizer and things like that, you can miss spots during treatment and the ants will still find the baits and give you good control. And we've also had no resistance developed for these products thus far, which makes them a great option because you can use the same product year after year and you don't have to worry much about resistance because of the way the products work. As with anything, there's always a couple disadvantages. You do have to time the application to when fire ants are actually foraging, and I'll give you some tips for that in just a minute. They're also very difficult to apply at low rates without proper equipment, and we'll address that as well in just a couple seconds. So what is a fire ant bait? It is a carrier, which has actually a yellow corn grit. Then that corn grit is covered with an attractant, which is usually some type of vegetable oil. Then that bait with the oil is covered with the active ingredient or the poison, and that gives you the fire ant bait. And you can see the worker down here carrying away his piece of bait. So there's two main bait classes. The first are metabolic or nervous system inhibitors. And you'll notice that these products give you a little bit of a quicker control. But fire ants are highly territorial, and so they will protect their range from other ants that are coming in. So these bait products that work faster, you get complete colony control in a few days to a couple weeks, but they leave you with no ants that are actually out there defending the territory from new ants that are trying to come in and build new nests. So you do usually get 3 to 4 months of control out of these products before reinfestation from new worker or new queens happens. So you have two options if you're trying to treat pastures and that's hydromethanon, which your example for this is Amdro Pro. So Amdro is one that you come across quite a bit in Lowe's or Home Depot, but same active ingredient, but this one is Amdro Pro, and it's the one that's actually labeled for pastures and hayfields. So it's about $16 an acre. It's our most economical choice, and you'll see complete colony control usually in a couple weeks. You also we have picked up a label for Advion this year, which is indoxacarb as the active ingredient. You see control in a few days with this product. It's really has the fastest control of any of our bait products. It does only have a label for horse pastures or companion animals. So if you don't have horses out there, then you can't really use Advion in any type of other pasture. But that is an option. If you have a horse pasture or a yard, that's a great option. The other class are insect growth regulators, and you can basically think of these as colony birth control. So the queen would be laying sterile eggs. The larvae and pupae that are already existing within that colony will not mature any further and will die, but the workers will have to die of old age. So notice this when you look at the control time. So you have about 6 to 12 weeks for complete colony control, but these products will give you a longer term of control. So over that time, you'll see the mounds diminish in your yard. With less workers, are really not able to keep up with rebuilding the mound and things like that. So you'll see pretty noticeable control within a month of the mounds within your pasture, but there'll be enough of those workers left that they're protecting you from reinfestation from new queens. So they're kind of protecting and giving you residual. It's residual through ants is basically what that's giving you. And these are pretty economical at $20 an acre each. Then they combined, did a combination product. So this is the active ingredient in Amdro Pro or hydromethanon, and the active ingredient in Extinguish, and that product example is Extinguish Plus. So what that does is some of the ants will get the quicker control from the hydromethanon, and so some of them will die, so it gives you the quicker 2 to 3 weeks for most of the ants to die. But then some of them, the queen will be only laying sterile eggs, or will be dead, and so it gives you the quicker control time, but it gives you the longer length of control with this product. And so it's a very good option for pastures and hayfields, and it's also about $21 an acre. So when you're talking about fire ant baits, I think a lot of people have traditionally done individual mound treatments, and I am only going to talk about broadcasting baits. So where broadcasting is really important, a lot of times you'll have about 3 months before you actually notice a fire ant mound in your yard or in your pasture, because there simply haven't built up enough number of ants to be able to build that mound above the surface yet. And so broadcasting, what it does is it allows you to treat the mounds that you can see as well as those that you cannot see yet. This is also important in the summer when it's really hot and dry. You may notice in your yard when it's hot and dry that you don't see any mounds, but then you may get a rain shower overnight, and you walk out on your porch the next morning and suddenly you have fire ants everywhere. Well, fire ants don't build up their mounds when it's hot and dry. They stay below the surface where it's a little bit cooler, until they're kind of forced to build up when that water table rises and they have to build that mound above the surface. So by broadcasting these baits, you're getting all the mounds that you can't see in your yard as well as those that you can. So it's a great option. And when we're talking about large acreage areas, this is a herd seeder. It's specifically made to put out fire ant bait. It's already pre-calibrated, so you can go and you can buy, say, Amdro Pro that you're going to put out in your pasture, and we can tell you how fast to drive. They all spread a 20-foot swath in your pasture, and we have these at almost every county agent or extension office in every county that you can just call and borrow the herd seeder to use. They all come with different mounts. This one is just for the four-wheeler, but we have multiple ATV mounts, 3-point hitches, and some to fit even in to use your car or truck. So make sure you contact your local extension office so that you can borrow one of these spreaders to put out your bait. Another economical option when you're looking at putting across large acreage areas, and this is one that producers really like, is that you can also bulk blend with fertilizer. And what we did, this was us putting out a trial in Talladega, and we put out Esteem and Extinguish by themselves, which were the two growth regulating insecticides, as well as Esteem and Extinguish mixed with fertilizer and bulk blended. So we bulk blended them at the co-op, we took them out, and we put them out using the hoppers that same day. And it's really important, if you're going to do this, make sure you put it out that same day, because I think the bait product would probably absorb the smell of that fertilizer if you left it sitting in the buggy overnight, and fire ants wouldn't find that very appealing. So make sure if you are going to bulk blend that you go ahead and apply that same day. So for a general pasture management plan for fire ants, broadcast a fire ant bait in the spring. Mid-May, early June is a great option because the spring mating flights have already ended, so most of the new mounds are out there, so you'll control almost all of the ants that are present at that time. So if you've never done any fire ant control, and this is going to be your first year to start, you're going to start with applying Amdro Pro or Advion if you have a horse pasture, or the combination product Extinguish Plus. So you start with one of those quicker acting products if you're going to apply in spring. You're going to be most active out there in the summer, so you don't want to apply an insect growth regulator that's going to take 2 months to work in the spring. Those are really what we consider fall products. So make sure you apply one of those quicker acting products in the spring. Then you're going to follow that with a second broadcast application in the fall. So that's generally mid-October is a good rule of thumb with that date. So then you're going to apply one of the growth regulating baits. So either that Extinguish, Esteem, or Extinguish Plus as your fall application. After that first year, then you can usually just broadcast an insect growth regulator or that combination product and just apply every fall. And that will give you about 80% control at least of your fire ants for that whole year. And depending on reinfestation numbers, you may be able to skip years if your reinfestation is low and you can tolerate the amount of ants that are in your pasture. You can get into where you're just putting out every other fall, one of those broadcast applications. So some take-home messages: make sure that you monitor. Monitoring is so important. It doesn't matter what the insect is. If you aren't out there monitoring your pasture, you're usually going to notice too late, and the control options are very limited and usually very costly. So make sure that you get a sweep net and you're out there monitoring throughout the season. Again, you can get those at Gimplers or BioQuip are two very good options. So use the resources that you have available. So we have a lot of publications. We have extension offices in every county to be able to help you make these correct decisions. So you're never going to remember all the choices of insecticides and all this information right off the top of your head. But that's why you have resources available to you to be able to ask the questions and get the publications and the information that you need. So be sure to reach out to us because that's what we're here for, to help you make those good decisions. And make sure to be proactive. So that's where monitoring and everything come into play. Be proactive, know that there's these pests out there and that you need to be monitoring, and have a management plan in place so that you're ready. You have that private applicator license and you have your sweep nets, and you know that you're going to have to probably do some type of management throughout the season to be successful. So make sure you're proactive and have one of those plans in place. So if y'all have any questions, I would love to answer them. I know this is pre-recorded today, but we can get you my contact information and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So be sure to sign up for the Forage Focus e-update. So it gives you monthly updates on publications and upcoming events in the Forage Focus program. And all of this is on the alabamaforages.com website. So make sure you sign up and you can get all of our updates. And for more information, you can always email alabamaforages@auburn.edu. You can see our websites here below and follow the Forage Focus program. Thank y'all for your time today and have a good day.